Aljamain Sterling looked pretty good for what we saw. He retained his bantamweight title, defeating TJ Dillashaw, I think sometime in the second round. But it turned out that Dillashaw dislocated his shoulder in the first round, then did it again in the second round. They eventually had to call it off. They interview him afterwards, and he admits that his shoulder had fallen out of its socket about 20 times during camp, which means folks were like trying to downplay this. You might have irreparable damage as a consequence of that, which we'll talk about in a second. BC, here's my question for you. This was a waste of everyone's time.
Yes.
Should this fight have even happened at all?
No, it shouldn't have. And I got a lot of flack, I'm sure you did too, in tweeting out, like, if he knew he was that compromised, which we found out after he did, I got questions how you got past the commission, how you got past the doctors, how you got, in this case, and Dana said afterwards he didn't even know. Well, it was getting fishy, Luke. I tried like hell to get an interview with him. It kept falling apart. He wasn't on the embedded cameras at all. He didn't do the public workout and hit mitts. I know it's a gray area because people are going to say, okay, Luke and BC, you're going to criticize Dillashaw now when you know the facts, but didn't you just have Eric Nixick on the other day basically lying, making Ngannou the all-time greatest man hero for what he did when they said don't even walk on that leg, let alone fight? Yeah, it's a gray area because it's a gamble. If you can pull it off and it does not compromise you, it sets you up to for greatness. And sometimes these guys get at a point through a long camp, they need the money. That's just the reality of it. Or they can't miss this opportunity because it may not ever come again. I get that. But shouldn't there be more things in place that are more honest in terms to prevent the other half of the equation? Like in boxing, when Sergio Martinez, the middleweight champion, welcomed Miguel Cotto in 2016 or 17, whatever it was, and, couldn't even stand on his leg and got dropped 3 times in the first round. And it was a, laugher after that. And a lot of people going, he knew how bad his knee was. Come on. Nobody wins in this case. And everybody's going, dude, I think I just saw Aljo win. And didn't he win a lot of money? And doesn't he get Dillashaw's name on his record? And maybe 20 years from now, we forget that this injury happened? Well, maybe. But he doesn't get any short-term critical respect. He beat a guy who the first second they collided, meaning Dillashaw kicked, Aljo caught it, took him down. The shoulder was out. And really, when it's that far out, I think this mixed with the Aaron Pico situation, we do have to look at this closer for the long-term health, as Luke said, the irreparable damage. These guys are wired in a way, and nobody is a more gritty competitor than Dillashaw. He's been caught cheating and long time off and keeps coming back and finding every way to be great. So I'm not surprised he would have been willing to do this. But somebody's got to speak up. Somebody's got to have a way in there. There was not a way, to say afterwards, I'm sorry, guys, I didn't want to hold the division up any longer. You've already been holding up the division. You've been out for a year. You got hurt. You said you destroyed your shoulder in April. You're only a couple years removed from double shoulder surgery. To have it come out 20 times in camp, this is not the Ngannou situation. And to hear afterwards, I knew I couldn't take him down, so I wanted to talk trash and get into a fight with him. You had one working arm, and I don't know how this fight was allowed to go on as long as it did. Even if they were able to pop it back in, which it seemed like they did at the end of round 1, as Paul Felder said on the broadcast, it's not going to have the full use you expect, and the idea, the amount of potential future damage that you're welcoming. That's where somebody's got to step in, a coach, a commission, a referee, and just be like, no, you can't continue. It's the same thing when Mike Chandler lost his belt to Brent Primus that time in Madison Square Garden. The foot injury. It's like he would have continued, but you can't. You can't do that. Nobody won in this. Dillashaw held up the division for another year, and I love Dillashaw. You know that. That's why I was willing to say, if his body does not betray him, I think he wins this fight. For all we know, he may have. But his body betrayed him, and he knew about that 6 months before, and it only got worse throughout camp. In some ways, Dillashaw, the villain, is back. He took the money. He took the opportunity, too. But he knew, the window's going to be closed. It's hard to keep your body together when you've gone through that much and operated at that high of a level. But, Aljo didn't win much. This didn't give us any answers. And obviously, it's extra easy to complain about when you're talking about the deepest division and so many guys. Marlon Vera, so many guys are worthy of shots right now. And, as much as I wanted to tell you ahead of the fight, yeah, he was once a cheater, but he served his time. Now we need to shut up about the PEDs. If he could pass the test, he's in there. Well, this was a test he would have failed. The shoulder, are you even healthy enough to do this? But somehow he passed that too, Luke. And I don't know if it was lying. I don't know if what happened. But this is just not a good look for the sport at all if this is the way shit plays out. And I know the pressure on them. I know that's why Cain Velasquez had to enter the first JDS fight and lose his title with that bad knee injury because it was the first fight on Fox. It was going up against Pacquiao Marquez 3. This fight card didn't need this. They could have pulled this. They could have rescheduled it. They could have done a lot of different things. What we saw was the worst case scenario. And the only question now is, Luke, how do you change that? What safeguards can you put in to prevent this?
I'm not so sure how easy it is to solve this problem. I mean, the first thing I would say is folks are like, well, and I said it too, like, because, the pre-fight medical screening is just garbage. But you got to understand something about pre-fight medical screening. While I think it is garbage, it does almost nothing. The reality is when you go to the doctor, you may not know what you have wrong with you. They may not know what you have wrong with you, but you're at least telling them, in most cases, you're telling them honestly what your symptoms are, and then they're able to sort of pinpoint what the problem is. Imagine you're trying to conceal something from the doctor by saying nothing is wrong, there is no problem, and you can more or less kind of get away with it from a motion standpoint if it is your shoulder without it popping out automatically, right? You can move it in sort of, just enough for a basic physical exam. How the hell are they supposed to know what's wrong with you? They would have to really, really go in and piece by piece and kind of find stuff. There's no time, there's no money for that. So if you're not honest in your medical screening, the process is fairly worthless, is the first thing I'd say. The second part is Aaron Bronstedt, our friend of the show, brought up a great point on Twitter last night, which was, the team did a pretty good job of keeping this thing secret because if it had gotten out, it could have fucked up betting lines. Also, if his team was less scrupulous, they could have bet on Aljo and made a ton of money to win because they knew about how fucking bad he was in a certain way. They could have easily just gamed the system. Like, there's all kinds of problems with this. But
let's stay there. Before you go on to the last point.
Let me just get this one last point. The last point is, and other folks brought this up to me, which I didn't even consider it because I just hadn't thought of it this way, but it's quite obvious now in retrospect. He was doing this to get paid, probably, right?
Yes.
He was fighting once in 2017, once in 2018, once in 2019, 2 years off, then once again a year for the 2 subsequent years. He probably needed the money. But it's like, dude, I'm not going to say that this is fraud. It's not. But this is borderline fraud. This is where you are. I mean, to bring up your point about the Nick Stick thing, BC, yes, that is not a great scenario either. But Francis was able to go out and compete without re-aggravating the injury in some kind of other serious way through the course of it and win, both to some extent in the stand-up, but certainly in the wrestling department. He got the job done. Literally, the first time he had to post on his hand, it came out. Dude, that fight was never going to go any other way than the way that it did.
And look, it is a gray area because if Francis goes out there and his knee buckles, 15 seconds in and the fight's over and Gon's the new champion and he's a free agent, we're like, we might have come down hard on Francis in that. I mean, that's the chance you take, just like they're taking the same chance that they're going to be able to win, without the injury aggravating. But what we found out in that post-fight interview was this, it didn't look, it's different if it happens in the moment or if it's something you're saying with my style, I may be able to conceal this. I mean, Anderson Silva came into the Chael Sonnen fight with a broken rib, and that certainly played a factor, as did PEDs, and him ending up on his back and providing the ultimate hero moment of coming back and rallying for the win. But it's tough. It's tough because sometimes you have to do that. I'm sure TJ looked at the situation and said, I just missed a year. I just missed 2 years before that. Every time I fight, I'm getting a major injury. Like, this may be the last chance to get this. And in the competitor in the back of his mind, I'm sure talked himself into the idea of luring Aljo into a standing war and trying to knock him out. Did that against Cody twice. But when it goes this way, then you got to start pointing fingers. And it was like, man, TJ kind of incriminated himself directly after in the way he went to apologize for it.